Welcome, my friends, to the realm of shadows and secrets. I am Mr. Dark, your guide into the unknown. I bring you a story that has lingered in whispers, haunting a quiet town wrapped in fog and mystery. It begins with an abandoned daycare, a place shrouded in tragedy and cursed by time. What happened within its crumbling walls decades ago left scars that refuse to heal, and now those who venture too close find themselves caught in a web of terror spun by the restless dead. Join me as we unravel the chilling truth of the Hollow House, a tale of betrayal, vengeance, and the things that linger when justice is left undone. Turn down the lights, lean in close, and let the story begin. The fog rolled in thick and low that Saturday morning, clinging to the dense evergreens surrounding Millbrook Elementary. Jessica Lane sat alone in her classroom, a mug of lukewarm coffee by her side as she graded math tests. Outside, the faint laughter of children drifted through the open window. It was a familiar sound. Jessica's fifth graders always lingered to play after class, especially the spirited group led by Tommy Winters. The school sat on the outskirts of town, separated from the woods by a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond that fence, hidden by tall grass and skeletal trees, loomed the Hollow House. Jessica glanced up from her desk, her eyes settling on the daycare in the distance. The sight of its weathered wooden frame, darkened windows, and ivy-covered walls always sent a small shiver down her spine. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Millbrook had. Decades ago, the daycare had been a bustling place where Eliza Marlowe, a kind-hearted caretaker, had watched over the town's youngest children. Then came the fire. It had consumed the building in the middle of the night, taking Eliza and her two children with it. Some whispered that the fire wasn't an accident, but the details were lost to time. Now the daycare was little more than a haunted relic, avoided by the townspeople and left to rot. But kids like Tommy saw it differently. To them, it was a challenge, a badge of bravery to get as close as they dared before running away, screaming and laughing. Jessica leaned back in her chair, listening to the rise and fall of their voices. It wasn't unusual for the kids to push boundaries, but she'd made it clear. No one was to go past the fence. She trusted them enough to stay true to that rule. The laughter faded, replaced by the occasional sound of crunching leaves. Jessica frowned. Maybe they're just wandering further down the fence line, she thought, brushing it off. But as minutes ticked by, the silence stretched, heavy and unnatural. Standing, she grabbed her jacket and stepped outside, scanning the playground. A distant shape moved at the edge of the trees, a boy running toward her. "Tommy?" she called, her voice sharp against the stillness. He stumbled into view, pale and gasping for air. His hands were clenched tightly around the arms of Max Redding, who hung limply in his grasp. "Miss Lane, help!" Tommy cried, his voice cracking. Jessica sprinted toward them, her heart hammering in her chest. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She crouched, steadying Tommy as he swayed on his feet. Tommy shook his head violently, his wide eyes brimming with tears. "It's her," he whispered, barely audible. "We saw her." Jessica's stomach dropped. "Saw who? What are you talking about?" Tommy's gaze darted back toward the trees. "The lady in the daycare," he said, his voice trembling. "She was laughing, and Max went to her." Jessica's grip on Tommy tightened as a chill ran down her spine. She looked at Max, his small frame unnervingly still, and then back at the woods. The daycare stood in the distance, its silhouette darker than usual against the fog. "I'm taking you both inside," she said firmly, wrapping an arm around Tommy while hoisting Max into her arms. "You'll be okay." Tommy whimpered but didn't argue. As Jessica carried Max back to the school building, her mind raced. She didn't believe in ghosts, but the terror in Tommy's voice was undeniable, and if they'd gone into that old building, its floors were unstable, its walls ready to crumble, They could have been seriously hurt. Inside the classroom, she laid Max on the couch in the corner. He stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering but not opening. Jessica grabbed her phone and called his parents, her voice calm despite the knot of unease growing in her chest. "He's okay," she assured them, glancing at Tommy, who sat huddled in a chair. "Just a little shaken. I'll stay with him until you get here." When she hung up, Jessica knelt in front of Tommy, her tone gentle. "Tommy, I need you to tell me everything. What happened?" Tommy hesitated, his small hands twisting nervously in his lap. "We weren't gonna go in," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I swear, we were just playing tag, and then Max said he saw someone inside." Jessica kept her expression neutral, encouraging him to continue. "He dared me to go closer, but I didn't want to. Then he said he'd do it, so he climbed through the boards on the window and went inside." Jessica's breath caught. "He went inside the daycare?" Tommy nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I waited, but he didn't come back. Then I heard him laughing. No, it wasn't him. It was her, a woman, laughing really loud." He shivered violently. "I went to get him, but he was lying on the floor, and she was standing over him." Jessica's skin prickled. "Who, Tommy? Who did you see?" "She was burnt," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking. Her skin was all black, and she had no eyes, but she was smiling, like she was happy. Jessica felt the room tilt slightly, her logical mind warring with the icy fear creeping into her chest. She reached out, squeezing Tommy's hand. "You're safe now," she said firmly. "No one's going to hurt you." But as she glanced toward the window, the daycare loomed in the distance, dark and silent. And deep in her gut, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching. Jessica woke Sunday morning with a heaviness in her chest, the events of the previous day lingering like a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. She'd carried Max Redding, unconscious and cold as a corpse, from the woods. She'd seen Tommy Winters, a boy who never stopped joking, trembling with fear. And she'd felt it, an oppressive presence looming over the daycare in the distance. Jessica had spent hours pacing her small apartment the night before, replaying Tommy's words. She was burnt, but she was smiling. As much as she wanted to dismiss it as a child's overactive imagination, something about his description gnawed at her. It was too specific, too visceral to ignore. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. The screen flashed with a call from Diane Redding, Max's mother. "Jessica," Diane's voice cracked. "Max, he's not waking up." Jessica's heart sank. "What do you mean? Is he breathing?" "Yes," Diane said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "But he's cold, and he's not responding to us. I don't know what to do." "I'm coming over," Jessica said, grabbing her keys. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Max's house was a modest 2-story on the outskirts of town. Diane opened the door before Jessica could knock, her face pale and drawn. "He's upstairs," she said, leading Jessica into a small bedroom. Max lay on his bed, motionless, his skin an alarming shade of grey. His eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Jessica knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his forehead before finally brushing against his cold skin. She shivered at the touch. "Has he said anything?" she asked. Diane shook her head. "Nothing. He just lies there." Before Jessica could respond, a quiet laugh echoed from the corner of the room. She turned sharply, her heart thudding in her chest. "Tommy," she breathed. The boy was crouched in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Tommy," Jessica said again, keeping her voice calm. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he began humming a haunting tune, a lullaby Jessica didn't recognize, but that sent chills down her spine. "Diane," Jessica whispered, How did he get here? I don't know, Diane stammered. He wasn't here when I checked on Max this morning. Jessica reached out to touch Tommy's shoulder, but he jerked away, his humming turning into a whisper. She's here, he muttered, rocking back and forth. She's in the shadows. Before Jessica could respond, Max's hand shot up, grabbing her wrist with a strength that didn't seem possible for a 10-year-old boy. His eyes snapped open, meeting hers with a vacant stare. She's coming, Max rasped, his voice guttural and alien. You let her in, Jessica screamed, yanking her hand away. Max's body slumped back onto the bed, his eyes fluttering closed as if nothing had happened. Diane was shaking, tears streaming down her face. What's happening to my son? She sobbed. Jessica's mind raced. She had no answers, only a growing certainty that the daycare, the Hollow House, was at the center of it all. That afternoon, Jessica visited the town library, a quiet, dimly lit building that seemed untouched by time. She pored over newspaper archives, searching for any mention of the daycare and its infamous fire. The articles were sparse, but the pieces began to come together. Eliza Marlowe, the daycare's caretaker, had been accused of improper behavior toward the children in her care, a claim Jessica immediately doubted. Eliza had lived alone with her 2 children, Ethan and Violet, after her husband abandoned them. When rumors began to spread about her conduct, she was ostracized by the community. One article, dated shortly before the fire, mentioned a confrontation between Eliza and Sheriff Henry Cole. Witnesses claimed he had threatened her, though the details were unclear. Then came the fire. The official cause was listed as accidental, but whispers of foul play lingered. Some said Eliza had set the fire herself in a fit of despair. Others believed the sheriff had locked her inside to silence her. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her head spinning. The details were murky, but one thing was clear. Eliza's death had been far from ordinary. And if Tommy's story was true, her spirit wasn't resting peacefully. When Jessica returned to her apartment, she found Tommy's mother waiting on the front steps. I didn't know where else to go, the woman said, her voice trembling. He's not himself. Jessica led her inside, where Tommy sat at the kitchen table, scribbling furiously on a sheet of paper. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his lips moving silently as he worked. Tommy, Jessica said softly. He didn't look up, but his hand froze mid-stroke. Slowly, he pushed the paper toward her. Jessica hesitated before picking it up. The drawing was crude but chilling, a woman with a charred face and hollow eyes, her lips twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. Beside her stood a boy, his hand in hers. That's Ethan, Tommy murmured, his voice flat. Jessica's blood ran cold. Who's Ethan? Tommy's gaze finally met hers, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his dark eyes, something not entirely human. He's her son, Tommy said. He told me they're waiting for us. Jessica gripped the edge of the table, struggling to steady her breathing. The boy in the drawing, Ethan, was the same child she'd read about in the library. Tommy, she said carefully. What else did he tell you? Tommy tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He said she's coming for you. Jessica couldn't shake Tommy's words as she drove back to the daycare later that evening, her headlights cutting through the thickening fog. She's coming for you. The boy's voice echoed in her mind, chilling her to the bone. She had no plan, no idea what she was looking for. Just a gnawing certainty that she needed to confront whatever was lurking inside the Hollow House. When she arrived, the daycare loomed ahead, its warped wooden frame shadowed in the pale moonlight. The building felt alive, its gaping windows like hollow eyes watching her approach. She hesitated at the gate, the rusted chain-link fence groaning as she pushed it open. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. "Jessica," a voice called. She spun around, her heart pounding. It was Claire Hensley, the retired journalist she'd spoken to earlier about the Daycare's history. "I figured you'd come here," Claire said, her face lined with concern. She held up a flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark. "You shouldn't be here alone." Jessica swallowed hard. "I need to understand what's happening. To Tommy, to Max, to me." Claire nodded grimly. "Then let's do this." The air inside the daycare was suffocating, thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, like blood. Jessica and Claire moved cautiously through the wreckage, their flashlights illuminating broken toys and crumbling furniture scattered across the floor. "This place is a tomb," Claire murmured, her voice barely audible. Jessica stopped in front of a small wooden chair, its paint peeling to reveal dark stains beneath. She knelt, her fingers brushing the wood. Images flashed in her mind. A boy sitting there, laughing as a woman brushed his hair. The warmth of the memory faded, replaced by the suffocating heat of fire and the sound of screams. She pulled her hand back, gasping for air. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, kneeling beside her. Jessica nodded, though her hands were trembling. "I saw something, a boy and a woman." Before Claire could respond, the temperature in the room plummeted. The flashlight beams dimmed as an eerie, childlike giggle echoed from the far end of the hallway. Jessica and Claire froze. "Who's there?" Jessica called, her voice steadier than she felt. The giggling stopped, replaced by the faint creak of floorboards. Slowly, a figure stepped into view. A boy no older than 10, with dark, hollow eyes. He smiled, his teeth glinting in the faint light. "It's him," Jessica whispered. "Ethan." The boy tilted his head, his gaze fixed on her. "You came back," he said, his voice soft and sing-song. "She's been waiting." Claire tightened her grip on the flashlight. "Who's waiting?" Ethan's smile widened as he turned, pointing toward a doorway at the end of the hall. "Mommy." The door creaked open, revealing a dark room beyond. A faint glow emanated from inside, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Jessica," Claire whispered. "We shouldn't." But Jessica was already moving, her steps slow and deliberate. The pull of the room was irresistible, like a thread winding tighter around her heart. Inside, the air was colder still. The room was empty, save for a single rocking chair that swayed gently back and forth. A faint humming filled the space, a lullaby Jessica recognized from Tommy's strange humming earlier. The chair stopped, and then she saw her. Eliza Marlowe stood by the window, her charred face barely visible in the dim light. Her empty eye socket seemed to pierce straight through Jessica, and her lips curled into a wide, unnatural smile. "Why are you here?" Eliza asked, her voice dripping with malice. Jessica swallowed her fear, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I want to help you." Eliza's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of sorrow. "Help?" she repeated, her tone mocking. "Help came too late for me, for my children." Jessica stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What happened to you wasn't right, but you're hurting people now. Children. You don't want that, do you?" Eliza's expression twisted into fury. "They hurt me first," she screamed, the walls shaking with the force of her anger. "They took everything from me, my name, my children, my life." The shadows in the room began to writhe, dark shapes taking on the forms of small children. They circled Jessica and Claire, their hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "Jessica," Claire said urgently, "we need to leave. Now." But Jessica couldn't move. She locked eyes with Eliza, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "You can't change what happened, but you can let it go. You can find peace." Eliza's smile returned, sharper than before. "Peace?" she hissed. "There is no peace for the damned." The shadows lunged. Jessica grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her toward the doorway as the room erupted into chaos. The children's laughter morphed into shrill screams, and the air grew heavy with the stench of burning flesh. They stumbled into the hallway, the flashlight flickering wildly. The shadows followed, stretching toward them like grasping hands. "Run!" Jessica shouted. They sprinted for the front door, the daycare groaning as if the building itself were alive. Plaster rained down from the ceiling, and the floor buckled beneath their feet. Jessica threw open the door, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. Outside, the daycare seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. But as Jessica looked back, she saw Eliza standing in the doorway, her charred face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. "This isn't over," Eliza said, her voice carrying across the dark. "You can't save them." The door slammed shut, and the building fell silent once more. Jessica and Claire stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "We need help," Claire finally said, her voice shaking. "Someone who knows how to deal with this." Jessica nodded, her eyes never leaving the daycare. She didn't know who could help or how. But one thing was clear: Eliza Marlowe wasn't going to rest until her story was finished. The next morning, Jessica sat in her living room, her mind racing. The events at the daycare felt surreal, but the cuts on her arms from clawing through splintered door frames told her otherwise. She had spent the night replaying Eliza Marlowe's words. "You can't save them." Claire had gone straight to Father Michael, a priest known in the area for handling unusual occurrences. Jessica wasn't sure what to believe, but Claire was insistent. If anyone can deal with this, it's him. By late afternoon, Father Michael arrived at Jessica's apartment. A towering man in his 60s, he carried a calm authority that immediately made her feel slightly more grounded. "Miss Lane," he said with a nod, "Claire filled me in. You've stirred up something dangerous." Jessica hesitated. "I just want to help the kids. I don't know what else to do." Father Michael studied her, his piercing blue eyes seeming to see straight into her soul. "If Eliza Marlowe's spirit is as tormented as you say, then she isn't simply haunting the daycare. She's feeding on the pain of anyone who enters it." "Feeding?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "Spirits like hers thrive on suffering," he explained. "The more they consume, the stronger they become. That's why the children are being affected. They're vulnerable." Jessica felt a lump in her throat. Can she be stopped? The priest's expression darkened. "It won't be easy. We'll need to confront her directly, to force her to face the truth of her death. Only then can she be released." By dusk, Jessica, Claire, and Father Michael stood outside the hollow house, the air heavy with anticipation. A group of townsfolk had gathered nearby, drawn by whispers of what had been happening. Among them was Tommy's mother, her face pale with worry. "What if something happens to you?" she asked Jessica, her voice trembling. Jessica placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll stop her. I promise." Father Michael laid out the ritual supplies, holy water, candles, and a silver crucifix. He instructed Jessica and Claire to stand behind him and follow his lead. "If she resists," he said, his voice firm, "don't engage. Let me handle it." The three of them entered the daycare. The air inside was colder than before, and the walls seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. "Stay close," Father Michael said, leading them into the room where Jessica had seen Eliza the night before. The rocking chair sat in the center, motionless now. The lullaby was gone, replaced by a deafening silence. "Show yourself," Father Michael commanded, his voice echoing through the room. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chair began to creak, rocking back and forth as a low, guttural laugh filled the air. Eliza appeared, stepping out of the shadows. Her charred face was a mask of rage, her hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You've come back," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "Fools! Eliza Marlowe," Father Michael said, holding up the crucifix. "We're here to free you, to end this torment." Eliza's laughter turned into a shriek. "Free me?" she spat. "You can't free me. You can't undo what they did." Jessica stepped forward despite the priest's warning. "Eliza, I know what happened to you. Sheriff Cole and the town betrayed you. But this, hurting these children, it won't bring them back." Eliza's smile twisted and the air grew heavier. "They watched me burn," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "They turned their backs on me, just like you will, just like everyone does." "No," Jessica said firmly. "That's not true. I'm here to help you. Tell me what you need." Eliza hesitated, her ghostly form flickering. For a brief moment, she looked almost human, her charred skin replaced by pale, tear-streaked cheeks. "My children," she whispered. "They took my children." Father Michael seized the moment. "Eliza, where are your children now? Are they here?" Eliza's form shifted again, her face twisting in pain. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking. "They took him. They hurt him." Jessica felt her heart ache. "Let us help you find him. Let us bring him peace." Eliza's eyes filled with anguish. "I don't know where he is," she admitted. "He's lost. Because of me." The shadows in the room began to writhe, and Ethan's small figure appeared beside her. His expression was blank, but his hand reached for hers. "Mommy," he said softly. Eliza stared at him, her anger melting into sorrow. "Ethan," she whispered, falling to her knees. The boy smiled faintly. "It's okay, Mommy. We can go now." Father Michael began the final prayer, sprinkling holy water around the room. The shadows dissipated, and a faint light enveloped Eliza and Ethan. Jessica watched as Eliza turned to her one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and sincere. With that, she and Ethan faded into the light, their forms dissolving like smoke. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the daycare felt empty. "It's done," Father Michael said, lowering the crucifix. Jessica let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. The daycare was torn down a week later. The townspeople held a small memorial for Eliza and her children, acknowledging the pain and injustice she had endured. Tommy and Max recovered fully, though neither remembered much of what had happened. Jessica stayed in touch with their families, relieved to see the boys laughing and playing again. One evening, as Jessica locked up her classroom, she found a small toy on her desk, a charred wooden block. She smiled, a bittersweet warmth spreading through her chest. "Goodbye, Eliza," she thought. "Rest in peace." But as she turned off the lights, she swore she heard a faint laugh echoing down the hallway.